In 1789, Benjamin Franklin wrote one of the most famous phrases in Western culture. It reads, "In this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes." But when you combine the two, you get one of the most controversial policies in the United States. Estate and inheritance taxes, often conveniently propagandized as death taxes, are hotly debated. Nonetheless, estate and inheritance taxes are necessary components of a functioning democracy. Without them, accumulated wealth generation over generation will lead to a handful of extremely wealthy families that wield a wildly disproportionate amount of power over society in perpetuity, turning us into the aristocracy that our founders rebelled against. While tax policy isn't necessarily sexy, I strongly believe that it, along with the national budget, is the most self-evident manifestation of a country's values. And I'm sure Benjamin Franklin would agree that we should value freedom over oppression by a select few. Aristocracy is defined as a form of government where power is wielded by the nobility, or a certain class with unique privilege resulting from hereditary titles and wealth without any input from the people. And well, Americans didn't like that. We declared our independence from wealthy European dynasties and formed the world's first representative democracy. While the country has never been perfect, its greatness lies in the promise of democracy itself. That people should be free and allowed to choose their own destiny. Making this fundamental promise, despite all the obvious flaws and contradictions the country had when declaring independence, is what makes this country great. We committed ourselves to the project that encompasses this promise. We committed ourselves to the journey. But there's a glitch in the world where an individual's wealth can explode. A cheat code, if you will. When you accumulate enough wealth, the money and the power that comes along with it naturally becomes a positive feedback loop. Suddenly, the money you have opens doors to connections and influence that are unattainable to everyday citizens. And I don't mean the dentist who's worth a few $1,000,000, or even the small business owner who has a nice house with a huge pool and a sports car. I mean folks with their own private jets and mega yachts on standby. The kind of people that can call up an elected representative and even have meetings with them. Not leave a voicemail with the congressman's office or write a letter, I mean sit down, lunch, and drinks. To attain this amount of wealth is quite an amazing feat and often comes out of a major breakthrough or visionary concept. There is an argument to be made that many of these individuals should be allowed to wield the wealth they generated. Personally, I think that wealth can only be created with the help of the society that enables it. No one creates alone, and there are workers along the way who provide the framework for success and implement the vision. Regardless, the real danger lies in what happens when these extremely wealthy individuals pass away. What happens to this wealth and accumulated power that continues to grow indefinitely through investment? When wealth transfers unchecked to the children of the world's wealthiest, the march towards aristocracy begins. Suddenly, a new generation of people wield a disproportionate and unearned amount of wealth and power. They receive this for no other reason than being born to the right person. Now, this isn't the first time we've seen so much wealth accumulate in the hands of so few in American history. Following the Civil War, America went through the Gilded Age as industrialization exploded across the country. Robber barons like Andrew Carnegie, John Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan consolidated power and wealth within the major industries of the time, like railroads, steel, oil, and banking. As they did this, the average American was plagued by rising prices and poverty. Sound familiar? Amidst all of this, in 1889, Andrew Carnegie himself wrote an incredibly honest and self-reflective essay titled The Gospel of Wealth. And in case you're wondering, yes, that Carnegie. Not to be that guy, but I strongly recommend you go read this essay. It's a window into the mind of one of the wealthiest and most powerful men of the time. It delineates the societal problems that arise when a select few accumulate excessive wealth, ironically coming from perhaps the most capitalist man to have ever lived. He also acknowledges the friction that naturally exists between the rich and the poor within a society organized through capitalistic competition. But then he argues that the benefits of that competition are worth it. as robust competition ensures a country where the best and most talented are incentivized to innovate and organize. In talking about the ultra-wealthy, he then describes the 3 ways that their surplus wealth can be used: inherit it to family, donate it upon death to some form of charity, or administer and spend it throughout one's life. The first, he argues, is a clear hallmark of monarchies, where everything is left to the firstborn son. The second, in his view, is shameful, since it involves someone with unimaginable wealth being happy waiting until their death before that wealth is useful to anyone other than themselves. He strongly argues that money left to family beyond what is needed for a comfortable existence is typical of monarchies and thus fundamentally un-American, and that the wealthiest should exercise their income throughout their lives in the form of public works. From the entire essay, what stands out most to me is his statement that the man who dies thus rich dies disgraced. So, the answer here obviously isn't communism, but if allowing for the unchecked transfer of wealth leads a society back towards monarchy, what should a democratic society like our own do about it? The answer is quite simple. Limit the wealth allowed to transfer to the children of the ultra-wealthy. This is done through what are known as estate or inheritance taxes, or if you're trying to demonize them, death taxes. Currently, these taxes take effect when you try to pass on assets over $13.5 million, or double that for married couples, a number which I think everyone can agree is more than enough for your surviving children to live comfortably. Despite what the news might try to portray, these taxes apply to significantly less than 1% of Americans. And completely logically but contrary to popular belief, they don't apply when you will your assets to your surviving spouse. Despite the high threshold, a loophole was created in the 1990s allowing for irrevocable trusts, such as a grantor retained annuity trust. Here, the assets to be passed on are placed within a trust, and the children meant to inherit the money are named as the trust's beneficiaries. And yes, this is where the term trust fund baby comes from. When the trust expires, the beneficiary then receives all of the assets within the trust with minimal tax liabilities. The common argument against these taxes is that they penalize folks with double taxation, once when they receive the income and once when they die. However, this fundamentally misrepresents how the ultra-wealthy actually become ultra-wealthy. By and large, they aren't working for a wage or salary. They are founders of huge corporations and thus own huge amounts of stock within those companies. They then take out loans against those assets to get cash and write off the interest on those loans. As such, they end up actually paying much less in taxes than the average nurse or teacher. I find the double taxation argument is really just a convenient way to convince regular working people that death taxes are unfair. So what would a better system look like? In my mind, the first step is remove all of the loopholes. Why create a tax system and then create a random mechanism to bypass it? When people complain about government being too convoluted and rigged in favor of the wealthy, this is literally what they're talking about. Honestly, I think the current tax-free amount you can pass on to your kids is reasonable. If you have 6 kids as a married couple, you can give each of your kids a little less than $5 million. Unless you grew up with a silver spoon in your mouth, that is a lot of money. After that, I would tax the remaining assets much more heavily than the current 40% top tax rate, which really isn't that high of a tax rate considering it's on people who are worth tens of millions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. And the schemes the ultra-wealthy cook up to work around even this modest tax rate highlights just how reluctant they are to pay their fair share towards the society that allowed them to create all of that wealth in the first place. So let's say, just for argument, that anything over the threshold was taxed at 100%. That strongly incentivizes the ultra-wealthy to spend their money, either through donations, public works, or literally anything else that isn't another asset. And guess what? It grows the economy. See, if they just bought another mansion or yacht, then they would still die with too much in assets. And if they don't spend it, well, great. That's more income for the government to help resolve the budget deficit. While we're at it, I would argue the top tax rate on estates should be much higher than 40%. Exactly how high can obviously be debated, and I'd love to hear your opinion in the comments. But personally, I would be for a pretty drastically high rate. I refuse to be gaslit and called a communist for this opinion. The death tax is the most American tax mechanism. This country was founded on overthrowing aristocracy and creating a government representative of its people. Death taxes are the only mechanism we have to prevent aristocracy from overtaking our democratic system, and they need to stop being a dirty word.